When we speak of sacrifice, most people imagine grand gestures, dramatic choices, or life-changing moments that make the headlines. But real sacrifice often happens in silence, hidden in the small decisions made day after day. It is in the dreams quietly folded away, the opportunities politely declined, the countless hours of effort that no one outside the family ever sees. This is the story of Amina, a woman whose life became the embodiment of that kind of sacrifice. Her journey was not one of fiery arguments or violent outbursts, but of quiet endurance, determination, and eventually, a form of revenge that was so calm, so patient, and so complete that it left everyone around her stunned. Amina was the eldest daughter in her family. She had always been a bright student, someone who enjoyed learning and dreamed of one day becoming a professional in her own right. Teaching, law, architecture, it changed from year to year as she grew, but the common thread was her ambition. She wanted a career that would not only bring her satisfaction, but would also give her independence. Yet, like many daughters in traditional families, she was tied in some ways to the fortunes of her household, and those fortunes were about to take a turn. Her father, a proud man who had built a small business from the ground up, fell ill when Amina was in her early 20s. It was not a dramatic collapse, but a gradual decline, the kind of illness that drained his energy and left him unable to handle the daily pressures of running a company. At first, everyone thought it would be temporary, that he would recover after a few months of rest. But as the weeks turned into years, it became clear that his active role in the business was over. The family firm, which manufactured household goods for the local market, began to struggle. Contracts were delayed, workers grew restless without strong leadership, and competitors began circling, ready to take advantage of any weakness. Amina's younger brother, Kamran, was still in school at the time, focused on sports and friends, with little interest in the seriousness of business life. Her mother, though strong-willed, did not have the knowledge or skills to manage accounts, negotiate with clients, or make operational decisions. So, without any formal announcement or ceremony, Amina stepped forward. What had once been her father's desk became hers. She started by answering phone calls, drafting letters, and reviewing invoices. Slowly, she learned to meet suppliers, to walk through the factory floor, and to address the workers in a way that combined authority with care. It was never her dream, not in the way she had once imagined her life. But she did it because she could not bear the thought of her father's legacy collapsing in front of him. Days turned into months, months into years. Amina gave herself fully to the business. While her friends continued their studies, traveled abroad, or married and built families of their own, she poured her youth into saving her father's company. She turned down invitations, excused herself from social events, and quietly let go of her personal ambitions. When marriage proposals came, as they often do in families like hers, she hesitated, knowing that leaving the household might mean abandoning her responsibilities. One by one, those opportunities slipped away. People began to whisper that Amina was too focused on work, too stubborn, or perhaps simply unlucky. But she never explained herself. It is hard to describe the weight of such a life. Imagine waking up every morning with the knowledge that your choices are not truly your own, that the life you are living is a borrowed one, shaped by duty rather than desire. Amina lived with that reality, but she also found a strange kind of strength in it. She grew sharper, more resilient, more knowledgeable than she had ever imagined she could be. She turned her father's struggling firm into a steady, reliable company again. She won the trust of clients who respected her calm intelligence and her sense of fairness. She became the person everyone turned to when there was a problem. And yet, in her own household, her efforts were seen differently. To her father, who came from a generation where men were always expected to lead, Amina was not truly the head of the business. She was just keeping things afloat until her brother Kamran was ready. To her brother, who enjoyed the luxuries that her work provided, she was simply fulfilling her role as the dutiful elder sister. The long nights, the sacrifices, the unspoken losses she endured, these things were invisible to them. By the time Kamran finished his studies, the company was healthy again. Amina had secured long-term contracts, modernized parts of the factory, and developed relationships that gave the family firm stability for the first time in years. Kamran walked into an office that was no longer struggling but thriving. He had not been part of the recovery, but he inherited the fruits of it effortlessly. At first, Amina thought this was simply the natural course of things. She assumed her father and brother would acknowledge her role, would thank her for keeping the company alive when no one else could. She imagined that perhaps they would invite her to share the leadership officially, to remain by their side as an equal partner. But that was not how things unfolded. Her father, proud to see his son step into the world of business, made an announcement at a family gathering. He spoke of Kamran as the rightful heir, the one who would now lead the company into its future. He praised his son's intelligence, his potential, and his confidence. And when it came to Amina, he merely said that she had been a loyal helper, a supportive daughter who had kept the files in order and managed things on the side until Kamran was ready. The room filled with applause for her brother, while Amina sat in silence, her heart heavy with disbelief. That night, she did not argue. She did not shout or demand recognition. She simply sat alone in her room, remembering the years she had given away. She thought of the nights she had stayed awake worrying about payroll, the mornings she had walked through the rain to secure a deal, the afternoons she had endured dismissive looks from male clients who questioned her authority, and the countless moments when she had told herself it was all worth it, because one day her family would see. And now she realized they never would. This is where Amina's revenge truly began. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in the quiet decision that she would no longer wait for recognition that would never come. She had built something once when no one believed she could. She knew she could do it again, but this time, it would not be for her father's legacy or her brother's benefit. It would be for herself. She began to plan. Not in haste, not with reckless emotion, but with the same steady discipline she had developed over the years. She started saving money discreetly, setting aside small amounts from her modest allowance. She began building connections with trusted suppliers and clients who respected her work more than her family ever had. She asked questions, observed carefully, and learned even more about the industry than she already knew. For the outside world, nothing seemed to change. She remained the quiet, dutiful daughter, still appearing at the family business every day, still managing her tasks, still smiling when people overlooked her. But inside, she was laying the foundation for something far larger. She was preparing for the day when she would step out of the shadows, not with noise or drama, but with calm certainty. That was the essence of her revenge, not to destroy for the sake of destruction, but to build something of her own, something undeniable, something that would expose the blindness of those who had underestimated her. She would not demand respect with words. She would earn it with results so visible that no one could ever dismiss her again. And so, the story of Amina's calm revenge begins here, with years of sacrifice ignored, recognition denied, and dignity quietly reclaimed through patience and determination. The path ahead would not be easy. She would face betrayal, disappointment, and the challenge of starting from almost nothing. But she had already endured worse. What she had lost in youth, she had gained in resilience, and that resilience was about to reshape her destiny. Amina's decision to quietly build her own path was not made in a single night. It was the result of years of observing, learning, and realizing that recognition in her family would never come. What hurt most was not just the dismissal of her efforts, but the casual way it had been done. Her father truly believed he was honoring tradition, and her brother genuinely thought leadership was his birthright. Neither of them saw Amina's role as anything more than temporary support, despite the fact that the company would not have survived without her. But Amina understood something they did not. She had already proven, to herself if not to others, that she was capable of running a business. She had done it once in crisis. She could do it again with intention, and now she no longer needed their permission. The first steps were small, almost invisible to those around her. She began to keep a notebook of ideas, writing down observations about gaps in the market, potential products that customers had asked for, and inefficiencies she noticed in the family firm. Her years of hands-on experience had given her a deep understanding of both the strengths and weaknesses of the industry. She knew where the suppliers were reliable and where they cut corners. She knew which clients always paid late and which ones valued long-term trust. Most of all, she knew how much potential there was for a business built not on shortcuts and pride, but on honesty and consistency. Still, she was careful. She did not want to attract attention, especially from her father or brother. They assumed she had settled into her role as the background supporter, and she allowed them to keep thinking that. She would sit quietly in meetings, nodding at Cameron's speeches and letting him enjoy his position of authority. But afterward, when the room was empty, she would take careful notes about what had been overlooked, what had been mishandled, and what could have been done better. The workers in the factory still trusted her more than Cameron. They came to her quietly with their concerns about wages, about faulty equipment, about unrealistic deadlines. She listened patiently, even when she knew she could not act directly. Over time, she developed a network of loyalty, people who respected her because she respected them. This would later become one of her greatest strengths, though at the time, it was simply the natural result of her character. Outside the business, she began to cultivate her own connections. There were suppliers she had worked with during the difficult years who had admired her professionalism. When she called them to ask casual questions about pricing or future trends, they were happy to share their thoughts. Some even hinted that if she ever started something of her own, they would support her. She did not make promises, but she listened carefully, storing their words like seeds waiting for the right season. At home, her life continued much as it always had. Family dinners were filled with conversations about Cameron's successes, his plans for expansion, his charm with clients. Her father's eyes would shine with pride, and her mother would beam with satisfaction. Amina sat quietly, smiling when expected, never revealing the growing distance she felt from them. She was no longer wounded by their blindness. She was simply detached, as though watching a play in which she no longer had a speaking role. But beneath that calm surface, she worked tirelessly. She began setting aside money from her modest allowance, and from small side tasks she quietly handled for trusted clients. She lived frugally, spending little on herself, always thinking about the future. Her room became both her retreat and her war room. At night, while the rest of the household slept, she would spread out papers across her desk, sketches of product designs, lists of suppliers, drafts of contracts, and calculations of costs. The quiet hours of the night, once filled with worry during the family company's crisis, were now filled with quiet determination. One of the most important decisions she made was to focus not on competing directly with the family business, but on carving out her own niche. She knew that if she tried to mirror exactly what Cameron was doing, it would lead to open conflict too soon. Instead, she identified a part of the market that was underserved, a growing demand for high-quality, eco-friendly household goods. Most manufacturers saw it as too expensive or too complicated to bother with, but Amina sensed an opportunity. She had noticed younger clients, especially those with international ties, asking about sustainable materials, fair labor practices, and modern designs. While others dismissed these questions as irrelevant, Amina paid attention. It was not easy to begin. She had limited funds, no official position, and the constant scrutiny of a family that expected her to remain in the background. But she had patience, and she had knowledge. She started small, working with a handful of artisans she trusted, experimenting with prototypes. She tested them quietly, giving samples to friends, asking for feedback, making adjustments. She moved slowly, but each step was deliberate. Meanwhile, Cameron was taking the family business in a different direction. Flush with confidence, he pursued rapid expansion, chasing large contracts that looked impressive on paper but carried enormous risks. He began spending lavishly on office renovations, new cars, and expensive parties meant to impress clients. The workers noticed the change. They missed the steady, approachable presence of Amina. They found Cameron arrogant, impatient, and careless. But he held the title, and they had no choice but to follow his orders. Amina watched all this with a quiet, almost detached expression. She did not interfere. She did not warn him, though she could see the mistakes piling up. She had tried, in the early days, to offer gentle suggestions, but they were brushed aside with condescending smiles. "Don't worry, sister," Cameron would say. "You've done enough." Leave the big decisions to me. And so she did. Her calmness was not indifference. It was strategy. She knew that if she argued or tried to reclaim authority, she would only be dismissed again. Instead, she let things unfold naturally, knowing that reality has a way of exposing arrogance. In the meantime, her own project began to take shape. Slowly, suppliers began to trust her vision. Workers who were frustrated with Kamran quietly expressed interest in joining her if she ever needed help. A few clients, who had admired her professionalism during the earlier years, reached out privately, asking if she was involved in any new ventures. She answered carefully, never promising too much, but always leaving the door open. Her greatest strength was her ability to wait. She did not rush to launch before she was ready. She did not announce her intentions prematurely. She built steadily, piece by piece, until she had something real, something solid, something that could stand on its own. And as her foundation grew stronger, the cracks in the family business grew wider. Kamran's spending habits began to drain resources. Contracts that seemed profitable turned out to be poorly negotiated. Clients grew frustrated with delays and broken promises. The very stability Amina had spent years creating was slowly unraveling under his careless leadership. Her father, though older and weaker, continued to defend his son. He refused to see the warning signs, convinced that Kamran was destined for greatness. Amina did not argue. She had long ago stopped trying to win his approval. Instead, she focused on preparing for the day when the contrast between her brother's failures and her own quiet success would be undeniable. This was the essence of her calm revenge. She did not seek to destroy them with loud accusations or confrontations. She did not need to. She simply built something better, patiently, quietly, and when the time came, the truth would reveal itself without her having to utter a word. What kept her going through those long, hidden years was not anger, it was dignity. She knew that she had given more than anyone could ever measure. She had nothing to prove to her family anymore. The only recognition she needed was her own, and the trust of those who valued integrity. That trust she was slowly earning. By the time her business was ready to emerge, Amina was no longer the young woman who had sacrificed her dreams out of duty. She was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. She had transformed her pain into discipline, her disappointment into strategy. And while her family continued to see her as a silent helper, she was quietly becoming their greatest rival. Her story was no longer just about sacrifice. It was about rebirth, resilience, and a revenge so calm that no one saw it coming until it was too late. By the time Amina's new business had taken shape, nearly 5 years had passed since the day her father handed full authority to Kamran. In those years, the contrast between brother and sister became more defined with every passing month. Kamran's confidence, once celebrated as a mark of leadership, had hardened into arrogance. His expansion plans were reckless, his spending indulgent, and his treatment of workers dismissive. The very employees who had once admired his charm now whispered their frustrations in private. Clients who had once been dazzled by his promises grew weary of delays and excuses. Meanwhile, Amina's company had begun quietly making its mark. She had chosen the name Safa Home, Safa meaning purity and clarity, because it reflected her values. Her products were not flashy, but they were consistent, durable, and built on fair practices. She paid her workers on time, treated suppliers with respect, and delivered what she promised. Little by little, her reputation spread. At first, her clients were small, boutique shops, local eco-conscious families, and a few overseas buyers interested in sustainable goods. But as word spread, so did demand. She did not advertise loudly, nor did she seek attention. She believed that good work speaks for itself. And it did. People who had grown tired of being disappointed by the big players turned to her. They found in her business what they had once found in her years ago: steadiness, honesty, and care. All of this, Amina did without fanfare. Her family still assumed she was helping with paperwork, perhaps dabbling in small side projects. They had no idea of the quiet empire she was building, and she had no intention of telling them. She wanted her work to reveal itself when the time was right, not before. The cracks in Cameron's leadership, however, were impossible to hide. His biggest mistake was a deal he struck with a flashy international distributor who promised huge profits but demanded steep upfront costs. Cameron, eager to make his mark and desperate to outshine his competitors, agreed without properly reviewing the fine print. The payments drained the company's cash reserves, leaving little for wages or maintenance. When the distributor pulled out at the last moment, citing unforeseen difficulties, the family business was left staggering under debt. Workers began to leave. Some went to competitors, but many quietly approached Amina. They had always respected her, and now they saw that she was the only one who truly understood their struggles. She did not poach them aggressively. She simply welcomed those who chose to come, offering fair wages and steady work. For many, the choice was easy. Clients, too, began to drift toward her. They remembered how reliable she had been during the difficult years, and when Cameron's firm failed to deliver, they sought her out. At first, she accepted only a few contracts, cautious not to overextend herself. But as her company grew stronger, she expanded carefully, ensuring that every promise she made could be kept. Her father, however, remained blind. He clung to the belief that his son was the rightful leader, dismissing all signs of trouble as temporary setbacks. He blamed suppliers, competitors, even market trends, but never Cameron himself. And when Amina's name began to surface in whispers, he brushed it aside as coincidence. "She's just helping here and there," he would say. "Cameron is the one carrying the business forward." But reality cannot be ignored forever. The downfall of Cameron's firm was not sudden, but gradual, like a grand building slowly crumbling from within. Machines broke down because maintenance was neglected. Key clients left after repeated disappointments. Debts mounted, lawsuits followed, and soon, the company that had once been a source of pride for her father became a burden of shame. It was in this period of collapse that Amina's success became impossible to ignore. Newspapers began to feature Safa Home as a rising star in the industry. Articles praised the company's sustainable practices, its fair treatment of workers, and its consistent delivery. Photographs of Amina began to appear alongside these articles, not as a helper in the background, but as the founder and leader. Her father read those articles in silence, his hands trembling as he turned the pages. For the first time, he began to understand what he had overlooked. Cameron, too, saw them, but his reaction was fury. He accused her of betrayal, of disloyalty, of stealing clients that were rightfully his. But when he shouted these accusations, people only shook their heads. Everyone knew the truth. Clients had chosen her not because she stole them, but because she had earned their trust long ago. Workers had chosen her not because she lured them, but because she treated them with dignity. Amina did not argue. She did not defend herself. When her brother confronted her in private, she listened calmly, her face composed, her voice steady. "I did not take anything from you, Cameron," she said. "You lost them yourself." Her words were not harsh, but they carried the weight of undeniable truth. The collapse of the family business became a matter of public knowledge. Competitors took over its contracts, creditors seized its assets, and soon, the once proud firm existed only as a shadow of its past. Her father, too old and too weary to rebuild, withdrew into silence. The man who had once dismissed her as just a helper now had to watch as the daughter he had overlooked became the leader the community admired. For Amina, this was not a moment of triumph in the traditional sense. She did not rejoice in their downfall. Her revenge was never about humiliation. It was about truth. She had not destroyed her brother's business. He had done that himself. All she had done was remain steady, consistent, and patient, until reality revealed what words never could. And yet, there was a quiet satisfaction in the way events unfolded. People who had once ignored her now sought her advice. Clients who had dismissed her as a secretary now signed contracts with her as the head of her own firm. Workers who had once been uncertain about following a woman now spoke proudly of being part of her team. Respect, the very thing she had been denied, was now hers, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it beyond question. Even within her family, the truth became impossible to deny. Relatives who had once praised Kamran now spoke of Amina with admiration. Friends of her father, who had celebrated his son as heir, now gently reminded him of the daughter who had saved what could be saved. At family gatherings, her name was spoken with respect, and her presence carried a weight it never had before. And through it all, Amina remained calm. She did not gloat. She did not remind them of their past dismissal. She simply continued her work, building her company with the same patience and dignity that had carried her through her darkest years. Her revenge was not loud, but it was complete. By succeeding quietly, she had exposed their blindness without uttering a single word of accusation. Years later, when people told her story, they often asked how she had endured so much without anger. She would smile gently and reply, "I did what needed to be done." The rest revealed itself, and that was the truth. Her revenge was not about payback. It was about living her worth so fully that no one could ever deny it again. Amina's journey reminds us that sometimes the calmest path is also the strongest. Revenge does not always come in the form of dramatic confrontations or bitter words. Sometimes, it comes in the form of steady persistence, quiet resilience, and the undeniable power of truth revealed through action. Her dignity, once overlooked, became her greatest weapon, and in the end, it was enough. So if you have ever felt invisible, dismissed, or underestimated, perhaps Amina's story will stay with you. It is a reminder that silence is not weakness, patience is not surrender, and dignity can be the sharpest form of revenge. You don't always have to fight with noise. Sometimes building something better is the loudest answer of all. And with that, we bring Amina's story to a close. If you found meaning in this journey, I invite you to stay connected with us. Please like this video, share it with others who might need encouragement, and subscribe to My Calm Revenge for more stories where dignity, patience, and resilience transform betrayal into strength.